My sister had nagged me for months about coming to see her, and I dodged it with excuses until the guilt got the better of me. In October 2024, on a Friday night, I packed my Subaru Outback with a duffel for the overnight stay and a cooler stocked with her go-to craft beers, then hit the road for the 4-hour trip from Nashville to Knoxville. I worked as a vet tech at a clinic close to Vanderbilt, dealing with grueling hours that drained my energy and left little room for hanging out. By that point, most folks from my class had tied the knot and bought houses, but I was still crashing in a one-bedroom rental, using my weekends to recover from the week. That Friday, I got a late start, thanks to a German Shepherd showing up with a blocked intestine. I wouldn't clock out until the dog was out of danger. When I finally hopped on I-40 heading east, the sun had dipped below the ridges, painting the sky in deep violet hues that always nudged me to push the pedal a bit more. I blasted the heater and figured I'd pull up to Candace's before the clock struck 12. The initial stretch went smoothly. A true crime podcast droned from my audio system, detailing a disappearance in Ohio, and it struck me as odd how tales of strangers' misfortunes could feel oddly soothing. Past Cookville, the cars started to space out, and before long, I was one of just a few vehicles dotting the road in both directions. Tennessee has a knack for enveloping you once the urban lights fade. The landscape rises in gentle swells on either side, like the earth shrugging off the chill, while dense woods crowd the edges, your beams picking out only trunks and fleeting darkness. Around 8:30, I pulled into a gas station for a refill and a cup of joe. The clerk, a weary woman sporting a cross inked on her wrist, warned me to take it easy ahead because fog alerts were out beyond mile marker 80. I nodded my thanks, fueled up, and eased back onto the interstate without dwelling on it. My rear view held only blackness, no hint that anything might shift. About 15 minutes later, I spotted lights flickering into view in the mirror. Nothing alarming there. Nighttime on I-40 draws drivers like semis and road-tripping parents timing their runs for sleeping kids. But these weren't ordinary. They closed in aggressively, then hung roughly 10 feet off my tail, blinding highs that flooded my cabin with harsh glow and weaponized the reflections straight into my vision. I angled the mirror to dim it and peered through the sides, straining to ID the rig. Seemed like an aged pickup, jacked up tall on its frame. I flashed my brakes a few times, the clear underscore quote, underscore 0 underscore Q, but it didn't back off. If possible, it inched nearer. The glare felt like a tangible weight pressing on my neck. I chalked it up to some antsy driver from around here itching for me to pick up speed or yield. I was holding 70 in a 65 limit, plenty for most. The passing lane sat vacant, wide open. Still, the truck wouldn't overtake. It loomed right on my bumper, those beams boring relentlessly. I nudged to 75, then 80, eyes on the gauge as it mirrored every move. My pulse quickened. A glance at my phone revealed a single signal bar, too weak for even a quick text. The upcoming ramp was 14 miles off, per the prior sign. I swung right and eased off the gas on purpose, handing the truck a clear shot to zip by and vanish ahead. But it followed suit, sliding over two, holding the gap and the piercing shine. That's when true dread knifed through me, hitting home that the person behind the wheel wasn't aiming to go around. They were tailing me. I snatched my cell to punch in 911, but no luck. The line just hunted vainly for bars in this dead zone between towers. I tossed it aside and clamped the wheel, fingers paling, brain scrambling for moves. The road unspooled, endlessly straight, flanked by barriers, foliage, and sporadic markers bouncing my lights back. Suddenly, the truck surged, veering left with a growl that cut through my engine's hum. For a brief, optimistic instant, I figured the operator had lost interest and chosen to overtake at last. The truck refused to overtake me. Instead, it eased up beside my car, keeping pace perfectly. Then it began inching into my lane. Not abruptly, but with a calculated slowness, reminiscent of a hunter gauging its quarry's response. I yanked the steering wheel to the right, feeling my tires screech against the grooved edge of the road. That jarring shudder rattled through my vehicle's chassis. The truck veered back to the left lane, and I gripped the wheel tighter, my chest heaving as I fought to hold the center line. For a split second, under a passing street lamp, my mirror reflected the driver's silhouette. A man with wide shoulders, his baseball cap tugged down low. His features stayed hidden, only the bulk of him leaning intently over the dash. The truck fell in behind me once more, hovering mere inches from my rear, and it hit me. He was toying with me, probing my nerves, gauging how I'd handle the stress. I'd encountered pushy motorists in the past, those furious types who swerve in front and yell curses out their window. But this felt entirely unlike that. No rage fueled it, no blaring horn or flipped gesture, just the truck lurking in my mirrors like a watchful beast biding its time. I floored the accelerator, urging my Subaru to 85 miles per hour, the gauge needle venturing into speeds I'd never tested on a pitch-black interstate. The truck kept up. 90. It still kept up. My options for velocity were dwindling, along with any real plan. Up ahead, illuminated by my beams, a sign warned of an exit in 2 miles to a place called Granton, unfamiliar to me. In an instant, I chose to veer right, holding the lane as the ramp neared, then whipping toward it at the final second. My tires wailed on the pavement through the sharp bend, and the car leaned perilously, the right side rising briefly before dropping hard. Through the rear view, I watched the truck rocket past the turnoff, its taillights glowing crimson as it braked in the gloom. A wave of elation washed over me. I'd shaken him off. I'd truly escaped. The ramp spat me onto a narrow state road flanked by fields and isolated homes, their front lights twinkling afar. I swung into the lot of a shuttered farm supply shop and doused my lights. Idling in the shadows, engine humming, I struggled to steady my ragged breaths. Every muscle quivered. I grabbed my phone, now showing 2 signal bars, and prepared to punch in 911 when fresh beams crested the ramp's end. The truck had looped around, no clue how. Perhaps a median U-turn on the highway, or he'd reversed along the verge. It was irrelevant. Those lights were descending the slope, crawling along, sweeping the pavement like probing beams. I shifted into gear and peeled out Sand's headlights, relying on the dim lunar sheen to guide me. The road twisted amid pastures and weathered silos, and I pushed the limit in near blackness, glancing rearward constantly. About half a minute in, the truck's glow materialized in my mirrors. He'd spotted me. He knew my direction, and then he pulled a move that almost sent me careening into the ditch. His lights went dark. We were both plunging forward, sightless now. Two shadowy forms racing across the Tennessee blackness, and the realization struck me with icy dread. He aimed to vanish from my sight, to slide up undetected, force me aside when I couldn't anticipate the strike. This wasn't mere pursuit anymore. I was his target. I flicked my headlights on again. I had to. The path ahead twisted fiercely, impossible to handle without vision. Not at this clip. Not with my pulse thundering so fiercely it echoed in my jaw. The instant my beams ignited, there it was, in the side mirror. The truck, slinking into my blind zone, perhaps 15 feet off my left rear, utterly concealed until then. A lane shift would have meant collision. Easing off would have left me exposed. I let out a raw yell inside the cabin and stomped the pedal. The Subaru surged ahead and I barreled through the twist recklessly, my tail skidding on the loose edge before gripping once more. The truck eased off a touch, but just a touch. His form loomed in the mirror now, a black mass against the void, shadowing me like a predator flanking injured game. A row of mailboxes whipped by on my right, followed by more, signaling we'd entered some backwoods cluster of homes. The homes were set far back from the street, hidden behind lengthy driveways, their windows pitch black and residents fast asleep, unaware of the terror playing out right in front of them. I considered swerving into one of those driveways, blasting my horn to rouse someone for aid, but I realized that would require halting, and halting would hand him precisely what he craved. Stepping out of my vehicle would spell my end. I felt that truth chill in my blood like frost. Instead, I pressed on, eyes glued to the horizon for any hint of human activity, a fuel stop, a cop outpost, or some spot buzzing with folks, illumination, and onlookers. My cell vibrated on the seat beside me, and I snatched it up blindly, activating speaker mode. It was my sister Candace checking on my whereabouts. I cut into her words mid-sentence. My sentences spilling out frantically, explaining how a vehicle was tailing me, attempting to shove me from the pavement. I had no clue about my location. I required assistance. I demanded law enforcement. She paused briefly, then her tone sharpened with resolve. She instructed me to remain connected. From her home phone, she was dialing 911 immediately. Continue onward. Keep chatting with her. Recite every landmark I spotted. In that instant, my affection for her swelled like never before. I rattled off whatever markers appeared. County Road 114, a barely legible mile post, an old sign promoting a church event from 3 years back. Candace echoed it all, passing details to the emergency operator via her second line. The truck lingered in my rear view, hanging back without advancing, as if biding its time. Suddenly, glows appeared up front, not from approaching vehicles, but steady ones, signaling a structure, a commercial site, anything beyond desolate fields. Drawing nearer, I discerned a sizable edifice with an open lot. Relief flooded me as I identified it. A truck weigh station, complete with a modest administrative hut and those harsh overhead fluorescents that glow through the dark hours. A big rig occupied a space in the lot, its driver's area unlit, yet implying a resting occupant within. I barreled into the area at 60 miles per hour, braking fiercely enough to have the harness dig into my torso. I flung my door wide and dashed to the building, yelling for aid, heedless of appearing deranged, desperate for barriers between me and the menace in that rig. The truck had tailed me right in. Its motor rumbled nearby, tires grinding over stones, followed by another noise. Sirens, far off yet approaching. That piercing cry sliced the darkness. The truck halted. From the glare pouring from the station's entrance, I pivoted and observed the operator. His features remained obscured, only the shadowy outline through the glass, that pursuing form from the prior 20 minutes. He idled there perhaps 5 seconds, motor humming, and I sensed his gaze upon me despite the veil. Then he shifted into reverse, retreated from the lot, and vanished along the road the other way. The semi's operator had stirred and was descending from his rig, inquiring about my distress. But I simply slumped against the hut's exterior and broke into sobs. Officers showed up roughly 4 minutes afterward. They discovered me huddled there, trembling, struggling to recount the ordeal as Candace held the line with me throughout. They never apprehended him. I shared every detail I recalled with the deputies. A shadowy, older model pickup, possibly a Ford or Chevy from the late 90s, operated by a burly man in a baseball cap. No plate visible, thanks to the night's cover. They issued an alert, scoured nearby routes, reviewed cams at highway ramps, but the vehicle had evaporated as if it were a phantom. 2 weeks on, an investigator phoned to reveal 3 prior complaints from females detailing analogous events along that I-40 segment in the last year. Identical maneuvers, blinding beams, aggressive pursuit, efforts to eject them from the highway. No one snagged a plate, no identifications of the perpetrator. He's still roaming, the investigator noted, with their sole recourse being boosted surveillance and a prayer that fate intervenes to nab him eventually. That term lingered. Lucky? As if endurance boiled down to mere fortune. I still journey to Knoxville for Candace visits, but that path is history. I tack on an additional hour via Chattanooga, departing only at dawn amid daylight and crowded thoroughfares. Occasionally, when I'm heading home from work at night and spot headlights in my rearview mirror, my heart races and my knuckles turn pale from clenching the steering wheel. The sensation fades quickly as I reassure myself that I'm secure here in the city, that not every pair of lights signals his presence. Yet deep down, I realize I'll always be glancing over my shoulder. A piece of me remains trapped on that shadowy Tennessee highway, fleeing, bracing for the instant those piercing beams return and the pursuit restarts. I occasionally reflect on the other women who shared comparable stories, and I ponder how many more stayed silent entirely. I question whether some of them escaped with the luck I had. Every time I slide into the driver's seat after sunset, I can't help wondering if this evening he'll target another victim. Selling irrigation gear may seem dull, but it leads to remote spots few ever visit. My route spans the countryside of Missouri, Arkansas, and sections of Oklahoma, agricultural heartland where the closest Walmart might be 40 miles off, and cell service feels more aspirational than reliable. I finished my degree at a modest Kansas college in 2015, and 8 years on, I'd climbed to regional accounts manager, which mostly kept me on the move, far from my own doorstep. On that specific Wednesday in late March 2023, I'd wrapped up my final weekly appointment in Pocahontas, Arkansas. A quiet town boasting just one traffic light and a cafe dishing out the finest chicken fried steak I've encountered. My navigation offered two paths to the Jonesboro Motel, the primary interstate, clocking in at an hour and 40 minutes, or twisting county lanes through crop fields that could trim nearly 40 minutes. Exhaustion weighed on me. My spine throbbed from 3 evenings on subpar hotel beds, and I craved nothing more than steaming water and an icy brew. The back road option felt like a no-brainer. I aimed the rental, a white Chevy Malibu reeking of years of heavy cigarette use, toward the dipping sun, and ventured into one of the loneliest expanses I'd crossed in ages. The initial 30 minutes unfolded serenely, a tranquility urban dwellers rarely grasp. Vast fields stretched endlessly, mottled in browns and grays from winter's remnants, poised for spring's revival. The pavement was slim, scarcely allowing two vehicles to scrape by without one veering onto the stony edge, its surface fractured and mended haphazardly. I spotted perhaps 3 farmsteads altogether, each tucked well off the route behind lengthy gravel paths and weathered mailboxes tilted crookedly. Not a soul else on the road. As daylight waned, painting the horizon in streaks of amber and violet, I lowered the window for a breath of crisp dusk breeze. The car's heat cranked eternally on high with no off switch. Signal dropped on my phone roughly 15 minutes out of Pocahontas, and the radio spat only fuzz. So I traveled quietly, accompanied solely by the motor's drone and the sporadic flutter of a crow startled from its perch. It struck me then how detached it all was, worlds away from any hint of society. Back then, that solitude felt almost soothing, restorative. I couldn't have known another set of eyes tracked my progress into the void, timing my arrival at their snare. About 40 minutes in, the first obstacle appeared. A sturdy bough, roughly 8 inches thick and 12 feet in length, sprawled at an angle blocking the way. Its bark gleamed fresh at the snap point, with tiny green sprouts on the finer branches. It seemed recent, probably toppled in the week's gusty weather, nothing out of the ordinary. I eased the Malibu to a near stop, assessing the blockage. The right margin offered slim clearance, transitioning from blacktop to firm soil and pebbles, enough to navigate past without tumbling into the nearby runoff gully. I inched over, gravel popping under the tires, and cleared it smoothly. Regaining speed on the main path, I instinctively checked the mirror. There it lay in the dimming glow, a shadowy form on the dull surface, shrinking in the distance. The idea of halting to clear it crossed my mind. Some hauler with a rig could miss it after dark. But fatigue ruled, and twilight hurried on. I figured a nearby resident would handle it. I pressed onward. That fleeting bit of indifference could be why I'm here today, sharing this tale. 3 or 4 minutes later, just after topping a gentle swell, the rare undulation in that utterly level terrain, something prompted another backward glance in the mirror. I can't put my finger on the reason. Maybe it's gut feeling, maybe sheer suspicion, or whatever label you prefer. But I glanced back, and the sight sent ice through my veins. Two shapes lingered on the pavement in my wake, precisely where that limb had fallen. About 300 yards distant, yet the dying sunset glow let me make them out well enough. A pair of guys in shadowy attire hauling something over the blacktop. It hit me after a beat what was unfolding, and then it snapped into focus. They were yanking the branch right back into position, not off to the edge, but spanning the whole width, sealing it shut. I observed them aligning it, retreating a step to inspect their setup, before both pivoted toward me. No clue if they spotted me peering through my mirror, but the vibe screamed they did. It seemed they pinpointed my exact spot and actions. Without a thought from my head, my foot jammed the accelerator, and the Malibu leaped ahead. The needle jumped from 40 to 50 to 60. Escape was urgent. I craved a bigger highway, passing traffic, a lit-up homestead, anything. My phone's GPS offered zilch sans service, yet prior to the dropout it indicated this stretch ran another 6 or 7 miles straight before linking to a broader county path. 6 miles. Hitting 60 miles per hour, that's 6 minutes flat. I could handle 6 minutes. My hands clamped the wheel until my knuckles throbbed. Gaze fixed forward, hunting for hints of habitation or progress toward refuge. The farmland whipped by on both flanks, growing dimmer with the sun dipping out of view as the car's beams flicked on solo, slicing twin ghostly paths into the thickening twilight. I kept stealing looks in the rear view, but the stretch behind held nothing, just dimming tarmac melting into gloom. Those guys had vanished or fallen too distant to spot. For roughly 90 seconds, I allowed hope that I was blowing it out of proportion. Perhaps locals tidying up road clutter. Perhaps repositioning the branch as a warning marker till a saw could be fetched. My thoughts clawed for benign scenarios that clashed with the dread my instincts screamed. Then, I rounded a soft bend, and there it loomed. Every frantic excuse choked off inside me. Another obstacle. Wait, no, a full tree. A whole oak, not massive but solid, around 30 feet in length. Trunk wide as a utility post, sprawled dead center across the lane. Its tips reached the culverts on both margins, forming a solid wall with no bypass, no verge to edge past. 0 options. I stomped the brakes, and the Malibu fish-tailed, rubber shrieking on the surface. It halted about 20 feet shy of the blockade. My lights bathed the log in stark clarity. Fresh, whitish timber where it had been sliced, not snapped, sawed clean through. Serrated grooves still etched into the core of the bark. No weather fallout here, no fluke mishap. Deliberate work. Someone dropped this oak and hauled it over, placed with intent to halt all passage. Engine humming low, I froze behind it, mind spinning dead-end choices. No detour possible, no smashing past. And reversing? Out of the question, with those two sealing the rear and likely closing in on foot. I was cornered, pinned on a ragged ribbon of road in isolation as darkness rushed on, phone dead for aid. That's when they materialized. Not from the rear as I'd braced for, but flanking out from the woods, edging the crops on both sides, roughly 50 yards from the edge. First, a shadow detached leftward from twin twisted oaks, then one right from a thicket of shrubs, followed by 2 additional, mirroring on each flank, positioned like a drilled formation. I tallied 5 before quitting, my head too scrambled to track further. They advanced at an unhurried pace, methodical, no sprinting or yells, just steady strides to the road, the poise of hunters certain their quarry was snared. Twilight's remnants had nearly fled, but outlines revealed plenty, no kids on a lark. Adults, mostly burly, in rugged gear, canvas coats, sturdy boots, mud or grease-smeared denim, and armed with lengthy items. One gripped what seemed a tube or steel bar. Another clutched a handled tool, maybe an axe or mallet, hard to say. A third had chain coiled round his hand, links trailing loose. These weren't for trimming overgrowth. Those guys were armed and strolling my way as if they had forever to get there. I figured I had around 30 seconds until they hit the pavement. At last, my brain snapped to attention, racing through every conceivable choice at a frantic pace that seemed oddly removed from reality. Fleeing on foot into the countryside sounded tempting, but they were familiar with the terrain while I was a total stranger. I'd be stumbling around in pitch blackness as they hemmed me in from all sides. Hiding inside the vehicle with the door secured might buy time, but a crowbar or hatchet could shatter a pane in moments. Then I'd be cornered in a steel cage, defenseless. Attempting to bulldoze the obstructing tree seemed gutsy, yet it was a sturdy oak, and the Malibu was just a standard 4-door. Worst case, I'd wreck the grill and strand myself without a getaway vehicle. Every path led to disaster, me lifeless or in even graver peril on this deserted highway, undiscovered for days. But then I scrutinized the tree more closely and spotted a potential break. The main stem was bulky, sure, but the protruding limbs weren't. Over on the right flank, where the canopy had toppled into the gully, the twigs were slimmer, a few no wider than my wrist. And past that, across the depression, stretched a level, empty expanse, freshly tilled. With sufficient momentum and the perfect approach, perhaps, just perhaps, I could crash past the spindly parts and burst into the clearing. I didn't pause to doubt it. The figures were roughly 40 yards off now, near enough for me to catch a barked order one of them yelled to his pals, a rough bark I couldn't decipher but clearly directive. I slammed the Malibu into reverse and stomped the pedal. The rubber squealed, gripped the dirt, and the sedan jolted rearward. I backed up about 50 feet before stomping the brakes, cranking the wheel sharply rightward and switching to forward. The motor growled as I mashed the throttle. The gauge hit 20, 30, 40, and I steered straight for the outermost tip of the downed timber, targeting the spot with the slimmest growth, the gentlest drop-off, my slimmest shot at forcing passage. The beams jittered crazily over the rough verge. Then the incline, and for one horrifying instant, the whole ride listed as if about to flip. Yet the tires bit into the yielding ground, and the Malibu surged ahead. Barreling into the snarl of boughs with a crack like countless fractures echoing together. Splinters flew over the bumper and glass. A limb smacked the passenger mirror, ripping it away. The chassis heaved and groaned, climbing the wreckage, the belly dragging on unyielding roots. And then, against all odds by some stroke of fortune, I broke free. The meadow yawned ahead, shadowy and vast beneath the emerging night sky. The soil yielded under the recent harrowing, swallowing the tires slightly in the crumbly dirt. Still, the engine pushed on. I refused to ease up. I refused to glance behind. I simply powered forward, rattling over the ridges at 30 miles per hour, wrestling the bucking wheel to maintain course. From afar, enraged yells drifted over the void, growing dimmer by the moment. No beams chased me. No motors revved in pursuit. This move had caught them off guard. They'd anticipated a driver who halts, freaks out, steps out to confront or negotiate. Not one wild enough to trash a leased ride for freedom. I barreled along for what dragged like ages, though likely mere 5 or 6 minutes, traversing one pasture after another, even shearing a short barbed wire barrier midway, until at long last, distant glows appeared. A genuine homestead, porch lamp aglow, and pickups lined up out front. I pointed the mangled Malibu that way and didn't halt until I was curbside at the entrance, blaring the horn for all I was worth. A senior fellow emerged first, around 60, in overalls atop a plaid top, gripping a scattergun with evident expertise. His spouse followed seconds later, already dialing on a wireless handset. I probably seemed deranged. A disheveled intruder in a wrecked auto, drenched in perspiration, rambling of armed thugs, and a barricade in the path. Yet an edge in my expression or tone must have swayed them. The husband stayed vigilant with his firearm as she summoned the local law. I perched on their stoop, trembling uncontrollably while clutching the water they offered, awaiting the wail of approaching cruisers. It was nearly 40 minutes before the officers showed, plus another hour to scout the route I'd outlined. Upon their return, their expressions revealed the truth long before they uttered a single word. The tree had vanished. The limb had disappeared. There wasn't a trace of any obstruction on that roadway whatsoever. Only some tire marks on the dirt embankment and a handful of snapped twigs strewn over the pavement. No individuals, no firearms, no proof that the incident had ever occurred. One deputy, a young man sporting a close-cropped haircut and doubtful gaze, questioned me repeatedly about alcohol consumption. I hadn't indulged. I hadn't used any substances. I wasn't imagining things. Yet their skeptical looks made it clear they doubted my account. They recorded my report, drove me back to my lodging in Jonesboro, and advised me to contact them if any further details surfaced. Sleep eluded me that evening. I remained in my room, door secured, with the chain, and a chair jammed against the knob, fixated on the ceiling while mentally reliving each moment of the ordeal. Come morning, I surrendered the wrecked Malibu to the rental agency and settled the repair costs without protest. The expense was justified. I phoned my supervisor and requested a short leave for personal matters. Then I headed back to Kansas, sticking exclusively to interstates, halting solely for fuel at brightly illuminated pumps amid crowds of vehicles. Over the ensuing weeks, I delved into investigations. I uncovered sporadic accounts on the internet, Reddit discussions, regional news repositories, crime enthusiast boards, detailing comparable events in remote southern and midwestern locales, fabricated collisions, contrived malfunctions, fallen trees or rubble obstructing secluded paths. Many tales concluded with survivors fleeing as I had, though some wrapped up with folks vanishing without a trace. Vehicles left deserted, unsolved missing persons cases. The recurring element was solitude. These culprits, whatever their identity, preyed on lone motorists on secondary routes. Those unlikely to be noticed missing promptly. Individuals whose absence might be dismissed as mishaps or voluntary departures. I never uncovered the identities of those figures on the highway. I never learned their intentions toward me. And a portion of me prefers it stays that way. The Arizona swelter has a knack for lingering on your flesh long after sunset. That September evening in 2022 proved no different. I'm Carolyn, and I'd recently celebrated my 34th birthday just 2 weeks prior to landing a role that would transform my life. Phoenix offered the renewal I craved after decades trapped in El Paso. The identical rental, the stagnant desk position, the familiar shoppers at the market who still viewed me as the reserved teen from school days. A former classmate linked me to an opening at a central advertising agency. For the first time in ages, optimism stirred within me. Thus, I loaded all my belongings into my aging Subaru Outback and opted to navigate through the darkness, as the thought of a solitary motel stay unsettled me more than fatigue. The itinerary was straightforward. 8 hours of driving, reach by dawn, launch a fresh era. I'd traversed this route once in broad daylight, finding it tolerable. What I overlooked was the desert's transformation under nightfall, when shadows erase known guides, and the interstate unfurls like an infinite obsidian strip. Around midnight, Tucson lay behind me, and I was midway between Picacho and Casa Grande. Details merged into monotony after endless stretches of beam-lit void. The radio had failed roughly 40 miles earlier, alternating between interference and snippets of Spanish broadcasts that drifted like murmurs. I recall checking my cell. No bars. Utter disconnection. And reflecting on the profound remoteness of this segment. No lamps lined the way, no advertisements, no hints of humanity save the sporadic glowing mileposts that gleamed in my beams. My brew had chilled long before, and I sustained myself on nerves and the allure of rest in Phoenix. That's when the dash display caught my eye. The heat indicator rising steadily. The dial edging toward danger with a pace that seemed calculated. I dismissed it as a minor fault in the veteran vehicle, but instinctively I trusted that gauge's reliability. Soon, it maxed out in crimson, and faint vapor started seeping from under the bonnet. I clenched the wheel and scanned for a safe spot to halt, but options were nil. Merely barren terrain flanked me, sparse vegetation and obscurity rolling toward unseen peaks. The haze intensified, veiling the view until the path ahead blurred. No alternative remained. I guided the car onto the slim verge, stones grating beneath the wheels as it came to rest. Shutting down the motor, unleashed a profound quiet that crashed over me like a barrier. Silence enveloped everything. No chirping crickets, no whispering wind. Just the cooling clicks of the engine and my pulse hammering in my ears. I remained seated for a bit, fingers gripping the steering wheel, struggling to grasp just how isolated I truly felt. My cell had 0 bars. The closest settlement lay at least 30 miles away in any direction, and my knowledge of vehicles extended only to filling the tank. I released the hood latch but didn't exit, recalling my dad's old advice from years back, about allowing a scorched motor to chill before inspecting it. The dash display showed 1247. I decided to wait perhaps 20 minutes or even 30 before examining the coolant tank and crossing my fingers for a fix. Beyond the glass, pure blackness reigned, the sort of inky void urban dwellers rarely encounter, where earth and stars blend into an endless nothing. I reclined against the headrest, forcing my breaths to even out, assuring myself this was merely a brief setback. Vehicles overheat frequently. I'd be rolling again before long. That's when faint lights flickered into view in the rear view, tiny specks at first, swelling as another rig neared from the route I'd traveled. A wave of ease surged through me for precisely 3 seconds, then the beams vanished. The approach continued. Now I heard the growl of its motor, drawing nearer, yet the driver had killed the illumination entirely. My gut urged me to fire up my own ride and bolt, boiling motor be damned. But my grip froze. In the side mirror, a form emerged from the gloom, a vintage pickup. Perhaps an 80s model, its faded coat swallowing the scant moon glow. It halted roughly 20 feet back. The motor died, and an eternity passed. No movement followed, leaving me frozen, scarcely inhaling, convincing myself it was likely a helpful passerby. A kind stranger who doused his beams for... what reason? My mind blanked on any logical answer. Then the driver's side creaked open, the sound reverberating through the barren wasteland. And a figure emerged. Tall and wiry, clad in dark denim and a laborer's coat amid the residual warmth. His features stayed shrouded, only his silhouette visible as he loomed, eyeing my vehicle. Arms dangled loosely at his sides, angled just behind his waist, as if concealing an object or readying one. Hard to say. He advanced with measured strides, and every fiber of me urged action. I jabbed the lock switch, despite suspecting the doors were secure, the snap deafening in the quiet. He paused mere feet from my door. He cocked his head, and his tone emerged smooth, nearly cordial, as if we were acquaintances bantering casually. "Carolyn," he uttered, solely my name. Breath fled from me. I'd shared it with no one during this journey. My only pause had been a self-serve pump near Tucson, where I'd transacted wordlessly. Bags hid in the rear, tagless and unseen. Impossible for this unknown soul amid the midnight void to recognize me. Yet he'd pronounced it like an old acquaintance. Words failed me. My windpipe seized, thoughts swirling with every crime tale I'd absorbed. Podcasts of disappearances on lonesome stretches, bodies unearthed in hasty pits, months on. He edged nearer, stooping to peer through the pane. Dashboard's dim shine at last revealed him. Rugged features, perhaps 50s, with hollow eyes that gleamed eerily, nearly transparent. A pale scar traced from brow to jaw on the left, and his mouth bore the desert's arid cracks. "Engine issues," he stated flatly, no query. "I can revive it. Lift the hood and come out briefly." His manner stayed affable, like aiding a pal with a spare. But those unblinking stares pinned me, sending chills across my flesh. I shook my head, voice emerging faint as a murmur. "I've summoned assistance. They're en route." Falsehood. He grinned then, lips stretching gradually to expose unnaturally bright teeth against his rough visage. "No coverage this far out," he noted, patting his shirt where a device likely rested. "I verified 10 miles ago. Dead zone till Casa Grande." He saw through my bluff, knew my bind. Delivered plainly, almost tenderly, it chilled deeper than any shout. I clutched my phone regardless, raising it like a flimsy barrier, and he simply observed me with that calm demeanor. Next, he started to prowl around my vehicle, strolling toward the front and then the passenger side in those deliberate, leisurely strides. The faint scrape of his fingers trailing over the hood echoed sharply in the quiet as he passed. Arriving at the passenger window, he halted and rapped on it thrice with his knuckle. Tap, 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 like a courteous guest seeking entry. "Carolyn," he repeated through the pane, "you shouldn't be out here by yourself. Dangerous things befall women on stretches of road like this." I longed to yell, but no one would hear. I yearned to speed off, yet my engine lay silent. Frozen in place, I could only watch as this stranger, who inexplicably knew my name, kept up his gradual circuit around the car. Shifting to the rear, I swiveled in my seat to track him, seeing him linger by the trunk and stroke the surface as if caressing a living thing. "Nice ride," he remarked, his words slightly dulled. "Subaru, dependable, except when they get too hot naturally." A quiet chuckle escaped him at his quip, sending a knot forming in my gut. My thoughts turned to the pepper spray stashed deep in my bag on the passenger seat, but averting my gaze even briefly to search for it felt out of the question. Finishing his loop, he reappeared at my driver's side door, now so near that the details of his jacket seams came into view. Suddenly, he seized the handle and tugged forcefully. The vehicle jolted, though the lock stayed firm, and a feeble whimper escaped me, sounding ridiculous in my own ears. The secure door didn't appear to bother him. Rather, it seemed to entertain him. He bent forward then, bringing his face to the slim opening at the window's upper edge, where years of wear had thinned the seal. His breath clouded the glass, carrying scents of tobacco, engine grease, and an acrid tang beneath. Quote, 11. He murmured into that narrow space. His tone was intimate, as if he shared the confined space with me. Quote, 12. My brain reeled, trying to parse his statement. Anticipating? How could he have targeted me personally? I'd chosen this path only 3 days prior, sharing it with no one but my Phoenix friend via a quick text. The sheer improbability amplified my dread. In a fleeting, frantic instant, I questioned if this was a dream, if I'd dozed off driving and my weary mind had spun this horror. Yet the odor of him was vivid, his breaths too intimate. When he rapped the glass once more, I jerked back violently, nipping my tongue. That's when the lights appeared. Distant beams from Phoenix's direction, 2 intense spots expanding on the shadowed road. He noticed them as well. Rising gradually, he pivoted to stare, his frame stiffening as he assessed the situation. He lingered there briefly, outlined by the nearing radiance, and I held my breath, bracing for his next move. The beams drew nearer, their source's low rumble piercing the arid hush. Glancing back at me for the final time, his features sharpened in the intensifying illumination. Those colorless eyes, that mark, a look not of rage or annoyance, but nearer to regret, like a kid whose playtime got cut short. "Another time, Carolyn," he murmured softly. With that, he retreated to his truck in the same relaxed rhythm as before, as though urgency meant nothing. He got in, fired it up, and drove off without illuminating his own lights, vanishing into the night ahead as if he'd never existed. The approaching vehicle, a minivan carrying a family of 4 returning from camping, halted upon spotting me sidelined with the hood raised. Douglas, the driver, and his wife Renee assisted by pouring coolant from their emergency supply, while their 2 children peered from the rear with drowsy interest. I probably appeared disheveled, as Renee repeatedly inquired about my well-being, probing if anything untoward had occurred, and I struggled to convey how a nameless man had prowled my car, uttering my name as if it were his to claim. They tailed me clear to Casa Grande, lingering as I veered into a well-lit gas station bustling with cameras and folks. I remained parked there for 2 hours, trembling, phoning my Phoenix contact and then authorities. The responding officers recorded my account but came across as doubtful. Authorities claimed no actual crime had occurred, and lacking a license plate or a clearer description, their options were limited. I didn't reach Phoenix that evening. Instead, I checked into a motel in Casa Grande, staying up until dawn, eyes fixed on the door, flinching at every noise from the corridor. It required 3 weeks for me to uncover how he learned my name, and the revelation only deepened the nightmare. Over the years, I'd fueled up at that Tucson area station countless times while heading to Phoenix, always using the pump payment method, assuming I blended into obscurity. Yet a rewards program tied to my credit card, one I'd enrolled in ages back and completely overlooked, exposed me. Each purchase generated a receipt with my complete name in their records. A buddy in the retail world explained that register access revealed buyer identities for pump transactions. I couldn't say if that guy was an employee, had connections inside, or used another tactic to monitor passing cars. Nor did I understand how he anticipated my vehicle's breakdown on that precise road segment. Perhaps he'd trailed me previously and spotted the vapor. Or worse, he might have tampered with it during a past visit. Those scenarios haunted my thoughts for months, until I compelled myself to shut them down to avoid losing my mind. These days I reside in Phoenix and steer clear of that desert route entirely. Trips to family in Texas mean flying now. I swapped the Subaru for a modern model featuring superior security and an integrated GPS my brother tracks via his smartphone. I've updated my name across all rewards programs, accounts, anywhere personal details could surface on a printout. On restless nights when sleep evades me, I ponder what might have unfolded had that minivan not materialized in time. If Douglas, Renee, and their drowsy children had chosen an alternate path. His words, "another time," sounded like a vow. For quite some time I braced for him to fulfill it. But 3 years later, that battered pickup hasn't reappeared. Nor has that steady voice uttered my name from beside my car. He could have shifted his focus elsewhere. Or perhaps he's lurking on some shadowy highway, poised for the next solo driver to stall in the perfect isolation. I push such ideas aside as best I can, but I constantly scan my mirrors and ensure my fuel never dips under half a tank. Solo desert drives after dark are off limits forever. Certain truths sink in after just one brush. Our whole family, including all the cousins, finished high school in 2008, landing us in our mid-30s these days. I bring it up because reaching that age often brings a sense of mastery over life. You've navigated plenty, gathered wisdom, and surprises feel rare. That illusion crumbles swiftly when you're stranded on a pitch-black rural New Mexico highway with a fake officer peering through your window. I'd just wrapped a professional gathering in Albuquerque and was en route to my Denver place. Staying put till daylight would have been wiser, but my cat's meds couldn't wait, and no one else could tend to her. Thus, I found myself well beyond 2 a.m., enveloped by vast, barren desert and fleeting, prickly shadows in my beams. The road unfurled like an endless void ahead, without another vehicle in sight for over 40 minutes. An vintage country radio channel dishing out 70s and 80s hits kept me alert alongside lousy diner brew. Cruising at 75 miles per hour limit, I nudged to 78. Nothing excessive. That's when rear lights caught my eye in the mirror, closing in rapidly. I assumed it was a rushed commuter, perhaps a delayed hauler. I edged rightward to let them overtake, but they hung back, matching my pace, close enough to identify a mid-size sedan, possibly gray or silver in the gloom. Suddenly, a lone blue strobe ignited on their dash. No roof-mounted setup like standard patrol cars, just a portable magnet model for stealth ops. Habit urged me to halt right away as blue signals demand. Yet, an inner warning held me back, fingers clenching the wheel harder while eyeing my phone in the holder. My father, a 23-year big-rig veteran, once advised that in remote spots, if vibes feel off during a stop, you can proceed cautiously to a lit, populated area first. He'd witnessed every imaginable road peril. I eased off the gas until I was going around 50, flicking on my hazards to show I'd noticed the vehicle trailing me, and continued along the highway. I scanned for any sign of a service station, a pull-off area, or even a lit-up building with people around. Yet the stretch before me offered only pitch black, broken by the vague outlines of far-off peaks against a marginally brighter horizon. That dark sedan clung close, its blue glow throbbing without pause. Roughly 2 minutes into this chase, a brief whoop from what seemed like a cop's siren pierced the air, a sharp bark. And I realized pushing on would only escalate the trouble. Up ahead, a broad gravel verge appeared on the right side, and I veered onto it, my pulse hammering in my ears like a drum. The car eased in behind about 15 feet away, switching off the blue flash but keeping the beams locked on my rear view, turning everything in the mirrors into a harsh white void. I couldn't make out a thing past the dazzle. I cracked my window open just 3 inches, enough for conversation, and held still. He took forever to exit his vehicle, far longer than in any routine stop I'd known. Eventually, he strode up quickly, nearly at a trot, halting at my side with a powerful torch beam already blasting into my eyes. He towered over 6 feet, clad in dark trousers and a plain black coat lacking any badges or insignia. On his belt sat a gun holster, the pistol's handle visible, but no other typical officer gear. No comms unit, no stun gun, no dash cam or body mic. He skipped any pleasantries or requests for ID. His opening line was blunt, quote 15. When I explained I'd slowed because I couldn't confirm he was legit, keeping my tone even, it clearly hit a nerve. His expression hardened, jaw clenching as he bent nearer to the glass. Quote 16. A mirthless chuckle escaped him. I pressed for his agency's details, but he brushed it off. Instead, he swept the light through my interior, probing the rear area, the empty front seat, and the carpets below. It paused on my simple black briefcase for my laptop, and he demanded to know its contents. "Just my laptop and office papers," I replied. He huffed dismissively and insisted I exit for a compliance inspection. Puzzled, I sought clarification on that term, only for him to enunciate it patronizingly, as if I were dense. "Get out for a vehicle compliance inspection." Every instinct urged me to remain seated. I'd never encountered such a procedure, especially since I'd been surrounded by law enforcement growing up. My uncle had put in 3 decades on the Denver Police Department. I offered to assist, but requested to view his credentials first. He fished a billfold from his coat, flashing it briefly for a couple of seconds before closing it. In that instant, a metallic shield-like emblem glinted, but the spot for the unit's title was marred, scraped blank, as if deliberately gouged with a blade or tool. That detail seared into my memory. An anonymous badge, stripped of affiliation or authority. He pocketed it again, resting a hand on his waist near the weapon. Quote 20. His tone had deepened, and his gaze held a predatory intensity, like a hound poised to snap, cold and unblinking. I refused to leave until he specified his department and the violation I'd committed. He smacked the window ledge with his open hand, jolting me back against the cushion. "Folks traveling solo after dark often carry secrets," he stated, his words unnervingly composed as if he'd settled on a course. Quote 22, quote 23. I shot back, my response sharp despite the tremor in it. He retreated from the door, not toward his ride, but circling to my car's back end. Through the side mirror, I tracked his shadow amid the crimson wash from my tail lamps. He tested the trunk latch, discovered it secured, then knelt to inspect something by the rear fender. My plate, I figured, committing the numbers to memory. Rising, he paced deliberately down the passenger flank, raking the beam over the glass, probing the cabin as if inventorying every item. At the side entrance, he tugged the handle. Secure. I'd never felt such relief for my routine of locking every door the instant I slide into the car. For a brief instant, he lingered there, peering at me through the window, and under the stark beam of his flashlight, his features came into sharp focus for the very first time. He looked to be in his late 40s, with rough, sun-beaten skin and a jagged scar slicing across his left eyebrow before vanishing into his hair. His eyes struck me as pale, perhaps gray or a faint blue, and they carried this chilling void that unnerved me more than any threat could. No trace of rage or impatience, simply an utter blankness, as if I weren't human to him, merely a barrier or perhaps a chance to exploit. He rapped the glass with his light in 3 measured, unhurried strikes and uttered, "You're complicating this unnecessarily. Unlock the door." My hand darted to the phone nestled in the cup holder, poised to dial 911. That's when distant headlights flickered into view on the road ahead, emerging from the path I'd just followed. He noticed them as well. I saw his head swivel, his frame go rigid as he followed the nearing glow. He froze for several heartbeats, motionless, his mind clearly weighing options. Then, wordlessly, he pivoted and strolled back to his sedan. No haste, no panic, just a composed, even pace, like wrapping up an ordinary roadside check. He climbed inside, and I braced for him to accelerate away, but instead, he idled with his beams fixed on my mirrors. The incoming vehicle drew nearer, perhaps a quarter-mile off, and from the elevated shine of its lights, I guessed it was a truck or SUV. I was torn between fleeing at full speed or holding position. One instinct screamed to accelerate and vanish into the distance. Yet, another hoped this newcomer might offer aid, serve as a bystander, or at least validate that I wasn't imagining the peril. I clutched the wheel tightly, eyes locked on the intensifying glare ahead. The truck sailed by without a hint of deceleration. It was an aged white pickup, and I barely registered a figure in a baseball cap at the helm. He didn't so much as look our way, barreling onward into the darkness as if stranded vehicles roadside were utterly commonplace. But that fleeting proximity, those scant moments with another person nearby, seemed to tip the scales. The sedan finally stirred. It eased onto the pavement without signaling or illumination. He vanished into the void, headlights off, tail lights dark. The whole works absent. I tracked its fading outline against the night until it dissolved completely. Only then did it hit me that I'd been holding my breath the entire time. I remained parked on that gravel pull-off for a solid 10 minutes at least, willing my shaking hands to steady for the drive ahead. Once I merged back onto the road, I pushed 90 all the way to the Colorado line and didn't halt until the glow of a round-the-clock gas station appeared near Trinidad. The following morning, I lodged a report with the New Mexico State Police. The dispatcher who handled it was courteous, yet unsurprised, a detail that chilled me nearly as deeply as the incident. He mentioned a string of similar complaints over the prior 18 months involving bogus traffic pulls on remote stretches in the Northeast region. The profile matched precisely: a gray or silver sedan, lone blue roof light, a hefty guy in nondescript dark attire who dodged questions about his agency. No one had snagged a solid view of the plates, thanks to his habit of angling headlights to dazzle the motorist. The car's exact make and model stayed elusive, too. When the officer inquired if the guy had attempted to lure me from the vehicle, and I confirmed it, a heavy silence stretched across the call. He affirmed I'd acted wisely by remaining secured inside with locks engaged. Not all drivers had fared so well, he added, though he stopped short of details. I chose not to press. Deep down, I preferred the mystery. That evening haunts me far more than I'd care to confess. Even on well-lit interstates bustling with cars after sunset, I find myself glancing in the rear view every couple of beats, scanning for that solitary blue flash. I steer clear of nighttime drives through New Mexico these days. I opt for alternate paths now, no matter the extra hours they tack on. Even if it requires an unscheduled overnight in a motel with a bill to match. My uncle, the Denver cop, explained that posing as law enforcement counts as a serious felony everywhere. Still, these perpetrators evade capture because they strike in desolate spots devoid of observers or surveillance. Quote 25, he noted. Quote 26, he left the darker possibilities unspoken. And I never inquired. All I can say is that out there, on some desolate highway cutting through the desert, That guy is probably still stopping drivers. And not every motorist will get fortunate with another vehicle arriving at the perfect instant. I managed to escape, but I can't fathom how many didn't. That realization haunts me on certain nights, leaving me wide awake, gazing at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of those lifeless, colorless eyes peering at me through the window. Folks who've navigated the back roads of rural Oregon understand how quickly the signs of society vanish once you veer off the primary routes. A buddy from college had tied the knot that weekend at a winery near Bend, so I'd driven the 3 hours from Portland to join the festivities. As the party wrapped up and I bid farewell, the sun was dipping low over the Cascade Mountains, streaking the heavens with rich oranges and violets. I'd finished at Portland State in 2012, built a solid career in healthcare management over the past 10-plus years, and figured I was familiar enough with the area to opt for a back route. My GPS indicated a 40-minute delay from roadwork on the usual path. Instead, there was a slim county lane that could cut nearly half the time. It appeared so serene on the screen, merely a faint line snaking across federal forest territory. Choosing it in the dimming glow of a Sunday dusk almost ended me. The initial stretch felt ordinary. Thick groves of Douglas fir flanked the way, their limbs creating an overhead shield that swallowed the scant remaining light. I spotted one lone farmhouse roughly 2 miles along, its panes lit with cozy golden light, and after that, zilch, just infinite woods deepening into night. My cell dropped service right away. Music, as I'd anticipated in this remote spot, so I'd saved the directions offline. The path started ascending and curving, every twist exposing more barren terrain. I had the radio tuned softly to a public channel with jazz tunes, and the sway of the bends had me in a trance-like state. Turn left, then right, music, left, once more. The wheel gliding effortlessly under my grip. No other vehicles anywhere, no traces of humanity, only my motor's drone and sporadic glimmers from road reflectors. I glanced at the dash clock. 7:47 p.m. By my estimate, 12 more miles until it rejoined the interstate. That's when a tight corner brought the sedan into view. It was an aged ride, perhaps a late 90s Buick or close equivalent, deep green with rust spots corroding the body around the wheel arches. Positioned at an angle spanning both lanes, its front end brushing the left embankment, the back end sealing off the slim right margin. The front doors yawned wide like fractured limbs, and the flashers pulsed lazily on the brink of failure. That faint orange flicker was scarcely noticeable. Music, suggesting the power source was nearly spent. My immediate assumption, a crash. Perhaps the driver spun out on the bend, clipped a deer, and required aid. I slowed down and coasted my Subaru to a halt around 30 feet back. The beams cast a stark glow over everything. Vacant driver's perch. Music. Vacant front seat. A crumpled takeout sack perched on the dash. Zero stirrings. No cries for assistance. Simply those feeble flashers winking into the dark woodland barrier. I lingered for perhaps 10 seconds, motor rumbling idly, piecing together the oddity before me. The vehicle's setup bothered me. It seemed too intentional, too precisely angled to obstruct passage completely. A genuine wreck would have shown tire streaks, shattered debris. perhaps a rail impact. Yet the pavement was spotless, and the car appeared intact aside from its wear. Instinctively, I fumbled for my phone, blanking on the lack of bars, when motion flickered in the corner of my eye. Off to the right, about 15 feet amid the timber, foliage rustled. Initially, I figured it was wildlife, a deer, music, or coyote roused by my lights, but then a metallic gleam caught the beam, a quick sparkle like sun on a music buckle or fastener. And beneath, screened by a stout log, a set of boots, heavy-duty ones with steel reinforcements, rooted solidly, immobile, simply poised. Music. My pulse hammered fiercely, rising into my chest. I dismissed it as nerves, imagining it was just a traveler stepping into the brush for a break after a breakdown. Yet even as the idea surfaced, it rang false. No one freezes statues still behind cover when headlights approach. No one conceals themselves. I swung my eyes to the road's left flank, probing the gloom outside my illumination. And that's when the other shape emerged. One of them was hunkered down behind a thick bunch of ferns, roughly 20 feet from the sedan, set up so that anyone stepping out to offer assistance would expose their back to him. He had on some kind of dark clothing, a hoodie, maybe a jacket, and I could barely discern the outline of his shoulders and the tilt of his head as he kept watch over my vehicle. Two guys lurking in wait, one on each side of a barely used road that probably only got about 10 cars daily. That sedan wasn't stalled out. It was bait. All my gut feelings yelled at me to get going. I didn't even deliberate. My foot just eased off the brake and jammed down on the accelerator in reverse. The Subaru jerked back with a violent lurch that slammed me into the wheel. And I caught the screech of tires scraping the asphalt as I twisted the steering sharply to stay on the path. In the rear view, there was nothing but shadows and the dim red shine of my tail lights bouncing off the woods. I had zero clue what lay behind, no notion if the road twisted, plunged, or squeezed tighter. I was barreling in reverse blind through the night at a reckless pace, totally unfit for the terrain. Then came the yells, two male voices sharp and furious. I flicked my eyes ahead through the glass just in time to spot both shadows bursting from the tree line and charging at my car. The guy on the right was quicker, eating up ground with those long, forceful steps. The one on the left fumbled inside his jacket mid-stride and yanked out an object, something shadowy and blocky that flashed briefly in my headlight gleam. No chance I was sticking around to ID it. I stayed planted on the gas, gaze fixed on the rear view, straining to track the pale edge line as I rocketed backward into the void. The motor growled against the revs, and the whole ride shook when I clipped an unseen crater in the road. My skull cracked back into the headrest, and for a heart-stopping instant, the back tires skidded onto the loose stones of the shoulder. I overcorrected fiercely, hauling the wheel left, and the Subaru whipped side to side before clinging back to the asphalt. From somewhere behind, or in front of them now, their shouts echoed on, voices fading but still too damn close. I stole another peek ahead and saw the nearer one had halted. He was planted smack in the road's center, lit up by my beams, lifting a phone to his face, snapping a shot of my plates. His partner hadn't quit. He kept pounding forward, now just 40 feet off and gaining quick. The road bent hard right around 100 yards earlier. I recalled it from the inbound trip, the caution sign with its bend arrow. Reversing into that turn at this velocity would launch me right off into the drop below. Seconds were all I had for a call. Stick with the backward flight and hope my memory of the bend held, or attempt a reversal. No space for a standard U-turn, but I'd witnessed big rig drivers pull off a slick maneuver on steep passes once. A deliberate whirl using speed to swing the vehicle around. Never done it myself. No clue if the Subaru had the chops, but the other option was plunging sight unseen into the twist, with one pursuer lunging at my door and the second logging my info to track me down later. Decision made. I yanked the wheel left sharply, slamming the brake with one foot while the other crushed the gas. The machine wailed. Tires wailed on the blacktop. And in one agonizing, stretched-out moment, the whole thing spun on a dime, like some twisted fairground spinner. The scenery outside smeared into a frenzy of dark trunks and stark light slashes. Abruptly, the car halted, now aimed straight ahead. No idea how it worked. No telling if it was sheer fortune, the laws of motion, or some primal reflex that had me feather off the brake at the perfect beat. But just like that, I was oriented correctly. Beams slicing along the stretch I'd just fled in reverse, and my foot hit the accelerator before my mind caught up. The Subaru blasted ahead with a thrust that pinned me to the cushion. A quick rear-view scan showed the chaser halted dead center in the lane, his form etched against the crimson taillight wash, staring as I broke free. The phone guy had vanished toward the sedan. I didn't ease up, didn't glance back, just floored it. Lights jouncing over the foliage as I urged the car beyond safe limits on that tight, snaking strip. My breaths tore out in quick, jagged bursts, and I noticed this weird keening noise escaping me, a mix of cry and wail, not remotely like a person's. The needle on the speedometer pushed beyond 50, then hit 60, along a stretch of road meant for no more than 35. The following miles blurred into nothing in my mind. My hands guided the vehicle on autopilot as my thoughts scrambled to process the nightmare I'd just escaped. I recall clenching the wheel with such force that my knuckles throbbed for days. The sharp coppery tang of blood filled my mouth as adrenaline surged through me. Every shadow or swaying limb in my beams made me jump, certain that another vehicle would lurch from the curve to block my path. Yet the way ahead remained deserted. Gradually, the dense woods gave way and a distant light signaled the approach of people and safety. Reaching the interstate at last, I veered into the nearest service area. A well-lit Chevron station came into view, with a handful of vehicles at the pumps and a young guy in an orange vest rounding up carts from the adjacent mini-mart. I slotted my car haphazardly over 2 spots, lurched out, and heaved onto the asphalt. The teen gawked at me. A lady, pumping gas, inquired if I needed help. Words wouldn't come. I stayed doubled over, palms braced on my thighs, trembling violently enough that falling seemed imminent. That woman at the pump dialed emergency services on my behalf. Jolene was her name, and she remained by my side until officers showed up, steadying me with a hand on my elbow and urging calm breaths. Just inhale and exhale. A pair of county sheriff's deputies arrived in under 15 minutes. I recounted it all. The dark sedan, the figures concealed among the pines, the guy snapping a photo of my license, the item yanked from his coat. They shared a knowing glance at the site description, a reaction hinting this wasn't their first brush with such tales. Deputy Frell, a burly fellow sporting a silver mustache, remarked on my fortune. He'd dealt with 3 comparable events on those backcountry routes in the last 18 months. Vehicles obstructing paths, strangers summoning aid with bogus crises. Of the 2 motorists who pulled over, one endured a brutal assault, theft, and abandonment in a ravine. The second, a lone female traveler much like myself, vanished without a trace. Her vehicle surfaced weeks on in a pasture near Redmond, gutted for scrap, her bag untouched on the front seat. The culprits stayed at large. No bystanders, no surveillance, nothing but the abandoned rides as clues. That evening I lodged the complaint and shared every scrap of recall. The emerald car with its corrosion patches, the rugged work boots, the black sweatshirt, the loping gait of one like a runner in training. Deputy Frell assured me they'd dispatch a unit to scout the spot. But by the time they arrived an hour on, the sedan had vanished. No tracks in the dirt, no prints, zilch to confirm the ordeal beyond my account, and the dings on my back fender from scraping whatever in my frantic backward dash. 2 days hence, I swapped out my plates for safety. A dashboard camera went in next. Rural detours became history for me, daylight or not. For months, I scanned my rear view obsessively, half expecting that olive vehicle trailing me or those shadows lurking at my home's entrance. The dread has dulled over time, but it lingers. On evenings when twilight falls and the highway empties unduly, silence pressing in, those memories resurface, the boots peeking from the log, the glint of steel amid the foliage, and I stomp the accelerator a touch firmer. I ponder the missing driver, the one who halted where I fled. Perhaps her courage outshone mine, or fate simply dealt her a crueler hand. Regardless, I grasp how narrowly I skirted oblivion on that stretch, a lesson etched into me forever. 14 hours into a journey plotted for 12. My navigation app shunted me onto obscure lanes in Georgia's countryside. It was a Wednesday in late September 2024, en route from my Charlotte place to celebrate my big brother's 40th in Savannah. At 26, reeling from a stalled romance and slogging through year 2 as a paralegal at a modest legal outfit, I hoped the lone drive would reset my mindset. Traffic flowed easy on the main route until a pileup by Monroe jammed things, funneling us all to side paths. Somehow, I wound up on a narrow blacktop slicing past thick evergreens and fields unfamiliar to me. Cell service flickered to a single bar. Dusk dropped swiftly over the canopy. It struck me as odd, not encountering traffic for nearly 20 minutes. The solitude ought to have unnerved me more, but exhaustion dulled my edge, my sole aim reaching the end before the clock struck 12. The wheel yanked sharply right before the noise hit. That dreaded thwack of tire shredding on blacktop every motorist fears. My right front tire had burst, forcing me to ease onto a slim roadside verge that could hardly accommodate my Ford Escape. As I climbed out to check the mess, the quiet enveloped me immediately. No chirping birds, no faint rumble from the interstate, just the whisper of breeze rustling the evergreens and the soft clicks from my engine as it cooled. The rubber was torn to pieces, and a chill settled in as I remembered my spare was one of those undersized donuts I'd never bothered figuring out how to put on. I fished out my cell to dial my insurer's roadside service, but the bars danced erratically from a single weak one to zero. I stood there, angling the device every which way in a futile bid to catch a signal, when suddenly headlights crested the curve in my rear view. A tow truck approached at a crawl, its amber dome beacons slicing the deepening twilight as if it had been lurking just for me. The rig halted behind me, and a guy emerged from the cab. He towered at about 6'3", lean and lanky with limbs that looked disproportionately extended. Dressed in a plain gray uniform shirt lacking any ID badge, his features were rugged and timeless, pinning him somewhere in the 40 to 60 range. His hair was buzzed close in a buzz cut reminiscent of the armed forces, and he had this habit of cocking his head a bit when eyeing me, like a hound puzzling over an odd sound. He grinned, but it stayed surface level, never warming his gaze. His tone came out steady, unnaturally so, as if he'd scripted the encounter. He inquired whether I required assistance, mentioning he'd spotted my flashers from over a mile off. I expressed gratitude, but explained I was reaching out to my insurance for a tow. He inclined his head gradually, then dropped a line that sent prickles racing up my skin. All nearby garages had shut down for the evening, and my safest option was for him to haul me to a secluded property roughly 15 miles ahead, where I could hunker down securely till dawn. I declined politely, insisting I'd hold out for the official service. He lingered motionless, thumbs hooked in his pockets, scrutinizing me with that quizzical tilt. The grin dissolved, and he warned that sticking around on this ribbon of pavement wasn't smart once night fell. I pressed for details on the risks, and he merely lifted his shoulders, muttering about mishaps in the area. Folks injured, vehicles vanishing. He edged nearer, near enough for me to catch whiffs of tobacco and a sharp, iron-like tang clinging to his attire. He claimed he was merely offering aid, pointing out I was a lone female on a deserted stretch, and that not all wanderers here meant well. The deliberate cadence of his words twisted the advice into something sinister, cloaked as worry. I repeated that I was okay, that rescue was en route, despite my ongoing failure to connect. He fixed his stare on me for an eternity before retreating to his vehicle, propping against the driver's side with folded arms, keeping vigil. I slipped back inside my SUV and secured the locks. My pulse thundered in my ears, a frantic drumbeat. I kept stealing looks in the mirror, where his outline loomed against the dimming horizon. Another attempt at the phone finally linked briefly to my sibling. The line crackled and faded, but I conveyed my approximate spot. Off Route 221, close to a place called Peaton or maybe Peaton County. The name escaped me precisely. He promised to alert the authorities and dispatch aid, urging me to remain inside with everything bolted. Then the signal cut out. That fleeting link felt like a rescue rope tossed over a vast, shadowy sea. I clutched the device tightly, noting the power dip to 37%, and forced myself to steady my breaths. The driver stayed put, a shadowy form by his rig, his attention boring into me despite the encroaching gloom. Time dragged, perhaps 10 minutes or closer to 20, and he showed no sign of departing. Eventually, he advanced on my vehicle once more, his gait shifted now, stripped of leisure and charged with intent, as though he'd settled on a course. He rapped on the glass, and I lowered it a mere sliver sufficient to catch his words. The affable veneer had vanished from his voice. He insisted I was airing badly, that my signal was useless in this spot, and no one would arrive. He'd handled scenarios like this for years, he added, and understood their grim conclusions. I demanded clarification on what he'd been managing so long, and he hesitated, as if he'd overstepped. He backpedaled swiftly, insisting he referred to hauling wrecks and aiding motorists, though a brief twitch in his face betrayed the fib. I ordered him to back off, threatening to summon the cops. His chuckle came out flat and joyless, devoid of any real amusement, before he added, "Fine. Give it a shot." He reminded me that my cell had 0 bars, I was stranded far from civilization, and the closest sheriff's office sat in Crawford County, a solid 40-minute haul away, even if they peeled out immediately. His familiarity with the terrain was eerie, the way he rattled off those specifics without hesitation, and that unnerved me more than all his earlier threats combined. In a move that struck me as utterly reckless, yet my sole way out, I cranked up my window, shifted into gear, and eased forward despite the ruined tire. The noise was excruciating, steel scraping pavement, the wheel rim flaring sparks that I caught in my side view mirror. None of it mattered. I'd take the hit to my vehicle over lingering there with him any day. He lingered in the roadway briefly, and I braced for him to block my path. But instead, he dashed back to his rig. In the rear view, I watched him hop inside and trail after me, holding a consistent gap of around 50 feet. He didn't attempt to overtake or force me aside. He simply shadowed, his beams bathing my interior in glaring white glow. I pushed on like that for what dragged on eternally, though likely just 3 or 4 miles, with the rim spitting fire, the wheel shimmying violently until my arms throbbed from the strain. I scanned desperately for any hint of human presence, a home, a filling station, passing traffic, anything. But it was all wilderness, shadowed woods, with that hauler lurking like a hunter stalking injured game. Then, up ahead, lights pierced the gloom. Not vehicle beams, but the pulsing blue and red strobe from a patrol car. Relief crashed over me like nothing I'd ever known. An overwhelming surge of feeling blurred my vision with tears I didn't even register at first. A deputy from the Crawford County Sheriff's Office had mobilized after my siblings' alert and been patrolling Route 221's back and forth in search of me. I veered to the shoulder and tumbled from the driver's seat, flailing my hands wildly as the officer emerged, one palm resting on his sidearm. The tow truck had halted roughly 100 yards behind. It idled there briefly, motor humming, and I jabbed a finger its way, sputtering through ragged breaths about the operator's pursuit, his insistence, his refusal to back off. The deputy aimed his beam at the vehicle, revealing a sight etched in my memory forever. The driver executing a leisurely, calculated U-turn and rolling off into the night. No haste, no frenzy, just composed and precise, as if interruptions like this were routine for him. Deputy Weston, sporting a heavy Georgia drawl and compassionate gaze, guided me into his squad car to steady myself. He passed me a water bottle and prompted me to recount the ordeal, which I managed in fits and starts, though the key details emerged. When I brought up the business name painted on the truck, something I'd glimpsed amid the chaos but hadn't fully absorbed, his brow furrowed, and he had me say it again. I recalled it as reliable roadside, or perhaps reliable recovery, though in hindsight the font seemed off-kilter, hastily slapped on, maybe by amateurs. Weston punched it into his laptop, paused, then fixed me with a look that knotted my gut. No such towing outfit existed in Crawford County or neighboring areas, he explained. He inquired about the plate, and I described the Georgia tags, convinced they began with BKV. He entered that as well, and following an extended silence, confirmed it linked to no licensed tow vehicle in the state's records. He radioed for support and stuck by me during the wait. A second officer showed up some 20 minutes on, and they coordinated a real tow service from a nearby town's outfit to haul my damaged ride. As we hung tight, Weston shared details that haunted my sleep for weeks to come. He'd noted this segment of Route 221 for odd occurrences in the last 18 months. Vehicles vanishing post-breakdown, motorists unaccounted for hours before resurfacing confused and blank on their whereabouts. One driver had her auto hauled to a supposed garage that turned out fictional upon checking. Her car surfaced 3 weeks later, gutted for scrap in a distant barn 60 miles off. No culprits nabbed yet, thanks to elusive suspects. Descriptions stayed nebulous. Medium stature, ordinary frame, bland features. Yet the guy I'd faced was anything but ordinary. As I painted his portrait vividly, Weston jotted notes diligently, as if my account could finally crack the case. My brother sped over from Savannah to the Crawford County Sheriff's Station, and I clung to him in the fiercest embrace of my life. He eyed me once, and tears had smudged my mascara, my body still trembling as I gripped a foam cup of lukewarm coffee without uttering a sound. He simply pulled me into a hug, allowing me to break down completely. The officers recorded my official account, then displayed photos of local suspects involved in car thefts, but nothing resembled the individual I'd encountered. They assured me they'd reach out if leads emerged, handed over a reference number and contact for a support liaison, then released me to leave. That evening, my sibling ferried us to Savannah in his pickup, leaving my damaged Ford abandoned in the towing yard for inspection. Sleep evaded me entirely. Whenever I shut my eyes, those unyielding headlights from the tow truck haunted my mirror's reflection, unwavering and methodical. His words echoed relentlessly. No one would arrive to help. I replayed scenarios endlessly. What if my brother hadn't picked up? What if the patrol had lagged by mere minutes? What if I'd foolishly agreed to let that stranger haul my vehicle to some secluded spot he intended? 2 months have passed since that ordeal, yet resolution remains elusive. About 3 weeks later, the county law enforcement reached out to inform me they'd traced the truck. It was reported missing from a reputable outfit in Augusta nearly a year prior, repainted and equipped with removable signs to alter its look. The license plates came from a stolen truck in Valdosta as well. The operator vanished without a trace. Despite my detailed portrayal, They never pinpointed him, or if they did, they kept it from me. I exchanged the remnants of my Ford for a fresh model boasting superior emergency roadside support. I've also installed a trio of safety apps that transmit my position sans cellular service. Nighttime solo drives are off limits now, especially on interstates or rural paths. Occasionally, I ponder if he's prowling those desolate segments of Route 221, lying in wait for another motorist's flat or breakdown. In the dead of night, insomnia strikes, and I dwell on the motorists Weston referenced, those who vanished for stretches of time, returning bewildered and blank on the details. I recognize my fortune these days, yet I can't shake thoughts of the unlucky souls and precisely what that driver envisioned for me had I erred by consenting. That extended journey with my buddy Mark felt like the fresh start I craved back then. Fresh from a soul-crushing job, I'd offered to join him cross-country for his relocation and assist with the move. Upon hitting that isolated wayside stop, the sort overlooked by most atlases, our chats had devolved into weary chatter. The atmosphere beyond the windows hung heavy with an eerie calm, as if the world paused in anticipation. One lone SUV idled several spots away, its motor purring faintly. Within, a man inclined toward the female passenger, murmuring intently, his mouth working with a clipped intensity that seemed aggressive from afar. She remained utterly unresponsive, gaze fixed forward, her posture rigid like a statue molded from paraffin. Mark grumbled about hitting the facilities before crashing out, so we made for the structure. The lavatory bulbs buzzed with a nauseating amber glow that highlighted every flaw in the flooring. While rinsing my hands, an odd constriction gripped my torso, a nagging intuition that events were unfolding beyond our view. Stepping outside again, the darkness seemed altered, subtly tilted in some indefinable manner. The SUV had crept ahead, now positioned to block the departure path, as though lying in ambush. The passenger had pivoted her head our direction, her features twisted into a rigid mask of dread, like she yearned to cry out but lacked the voice. Nearing our ride, the man inside ignored us entirely, chatting hands-free with a abruptly light-hearted lilt. His phrasing clashed with the tension. "Sure. We'll stay under wraps. No reason to alert anyone for now." That assured swagger spoke of someone convinced they orchestrated every element. Mark exchanged a glance loaded with unspoken worry, bridging the gap without words. Her stare followed our every step, a frantic appeal shimmering through the window. My airway constricted, torn between intervening, fleeing, or acting oblivious. We sped off in haste, the quiet stretching a solid half-hour before conversation resumed. We'd intended to endure till sunrise, but exhaustion overruled us both. We arrived at a run-down roadside motel that seemed operational despite its age, featuring a flickering vacancy sign and a parking area illuminated by dim floodlights. As Mark handled the check-in, I scanned the lot, attempting to dispel the unease from our earlier stop at the rest area. It almost succeeded for a brief instant, until a recognizable vehicle glided silently along the road and into the lot. The identical SUV, with its lights extinguished, crept forward so slowly it almost appeared stationary. My heart clenched once more, and every gut feeling told me this was no accident. The car positioned itself in the distant corner as though aiming to stay inconspicuous, but the enveloping shadows only highlighted its suspicious intent. Clearly, something was tailing us. Yet we remained clueless about the motive. We hurried to our room and secured the door right away, each of us feigning composure despite our inner turmoil. The setup was standard for such places, a pair of narrow rooms divided by a fragile wall that might give way under a strong shove. Mark attempted to act unfazed, channel surfing the TV as if mere background chatter could restore a sense of routine. I lingered by the window, peeking at the lot through a narrow gap in the drapes. The SUV remained parked, motor silent, no activity within. Just a shadowy form lurking in the edge of darkness like it was part of the night itself. My mind kept drifting back to the woman's expression from before. Her gaze had fixed on me, wide-eyed and mute, pleading in utter silence. That vision haunted me more intensely than any words from the man. Past midnight, a faint tapping began, subtle initially, so understated I dismissed it as the structure creaking or branches grazing the exterior. Yet it recurred. 3 deliberate, evenly spaced knocks, deliberate in their rhythm. Mark silenced the television at once. We both fixed our eyes on the shared wall, which seemed far too insubstantial to offer real protection. The taps grew a touch more insistent, as if probing the limits before alerting anyone. I murmured Mark's name, but he stayed silent. Instead, he approached the wall with deliberate, measured strides, bracing for it to shift or give way. Then an incongruous noise emerged, nothing like mere taps. A subdued scuffle, like fabric trailing gently over the carpeted floor, directly adjacent. At first, we hesitated to contact the front desk, figuring it might be an overblown response to exhaustion and a draining day. But a fresh sound erased all hesitation. A hushed, labored breath. The sort emitted when suppressing noise with effort. That prompted Mark to grab his phone. As he made the call, I retreated from the wall, struck by an eerie sensation that someone was echoing my actions mere inches apart. The dispatcher promised to dispatch a unit. While Mark detailed the issue, I monitored the window, anticipating the SUV might advance straight to our entrance. But the lot remained eerily motionless, as though time itself had frozen while whatever occupied the neighboring room strained to stay undetected. 10 minutes passed before a knock echoed at our door, not from authorities but gentler and more deliberate, mirroring the earlier taps. Mark and I froze in place, exchanging glances in that suspended instant where even breathing felt risky. No further knocks followed. Rather, footfalls proceeded beyond our door along the corridor, halting toward the building's remote end. A faint door creak followed, and then silence enveloped everything once more. A few minutes afterward, the patrol vehicle pulled up, its lights pulsing softly against our curtains. A wave of relief hit me, lasting only fleetingly as I grasped that I had no clue what the police might uncover beyond that partition. The officers rapped on the adjacent room, identifying themselves. Silence greeted them. They repeated the knock, more forcefully, and the night's atmosphere thickened palpably, charged with suspense and anticipation. One tried the knob, and the door swung inward effortlessly. Mark and I edged nearer, peering from our threshold despite knowing better. The space was deserted, utterly so. Bed pristine, lights dimmed, no bags or indications of occupancy whatsoever. It wasn't the void that chilled me, but the faint aroma of inexpensive aftershave blended with a tangy metallic edge, suggesting a hasty departure. The officers shared a knowing glance, the sort implying they wouldn't dismiss this lightly. They patrolled the exterior path, inspecting entries and alcoves, but the intruder, or whatever it was, had vanished tracelessly. As they returned to question us, the front desk attendant joined, materializing unobtrusively in the hall. He was an elderly fellow with a fidgety tic of stroking his thumb along his hand's edge. He paid close attention while we described the SUV, the rhythmic tapping, and all the details. As soon as Mark mentioned the guy at the rest stop who was chatting on speaker, the receptionist's body went rigid. He dropped his tone and uttered words that sent chills racing across my skin. Quote, 31. He had checked in here previously, never using the same identity, always arriving after dark, always accompanied by a woman who stayed completely silent. Not a single word from her. His gaze darted to the cops, as if he wished he could take back his words. The officers took it seriously, jotting down every bit, right down to the vehicle's details, even though I could sense they grasped how elusive this whole mess might turn out. In the end, the squad car headed off to patrol the surrounding routes, and the clerk urged us to relocate to a room right by the front counter for the remainder of the evening. He passed over a fresh key card with a measured, wary slowness, as though he half expected that stranger to materialize right behind us. Mark collected our things, and we trailed the clerk along the path, peering over the edge at the lot every couple of paces. The SUV had vanished. No rumble of an engine, no headlights, no shadow hiding in the shadowy spot where it had parked before. The empty patch on the pavement seemed off in a way that's tough to describe, like the ground itself was glad to be free of its weight. We attempted to rest, but noises kept yanking us alert. The creak of plumbing, vehicles rumbling by on the interstate, the bang of a neighbor's door, shutting, dragging us right back into the evening's unease. My thoughts kept drifting to that woman, her intense stare toward us, like it was her final shot to connect with anyone before vanishing forever. Come dawn, the patrol hadn't spotted the SUV or any trace from the clerk's earlier run-ins. We settled the bill in a hurry, offering thanks to the clerk, who merely dipped his head, as if these eerie occurrences weighed on him far more than he'd let on. Pulling out onto the road, the sun pierced the hanging mist, rendering the world seem safe once more. Yet that image lingered in my head. The woman in the front seat, her eyes fixed on me, pleading wordlessly for aid I couldn't provide. Mark and I exchanged hardly a word during the following hours. And when conversation finally broke the silence, we steered clear of dissecting the events. No matter what scheme that man was part of, or who the woman truly was, they slipped away as abruptly as they'd shown up. The sole solid closure we received was the certainty that we'd departed that inn unscathed, and that the most chilling elements aren't otherworldly at all. They're simply ordinary folks gliding silently through the world's hidden fissures, counting on staying unseen. It's tricky to sum up my circumstances back then without coming across as all over the place, but in early 2024, I was bouncing around the area on freelance gigs, hopping between obscure hamlets since it beat settling in one spot for the pay. That particular week I was pushing northward following a task that dragged on, fueled by roadside brew and a music selection I'd looped to exhaustion. Mid-afternoon, in the stretch between places I'd barely registered, my front right tire began this irregular shimmy, like the rim itself was tilting unpredictably with each rotation. I eased off the road, inspected it, spotted no clear problem, but the noise rattled me enough that I wasn't about to push another 50 miles on it. A battered roadside marker directed me to a settlement that I could have sworn hadn't appeared on my navigation the prior day. So I veered that way, fingers crossed for a repair shop. It hardly qualified as a community, just 3 or 4 streets with far more shuttered storefronts than active ones. The sole hint of activity was a mini-mart displaying a lopsided open placard humming faintly. Tucked behind it was a workshop that appeared to have undergone a half-hearted update decades back and been abandoned mid-project. One steel overhead entrance hung partially ajar, and within loomed a lanky fellow in a grease-smeared jumpsuit, arms bound at his hips by the rolled-up sleeves. His embroidered tag had flaked off, showing just a faint shape. He sported rough, graying locks pulled into a ponytail with a crimson rubber tie, and a gaze that blinked at the most untimely moments. Once I outlined the tire trouble, he inclined his head gradually and mentioned he'd have to wheel the vehicle into the secured section for precautions, then let out a peculiar hacking chuckle like he'd cracked a private joke. I pushed back, suggesting I could linger outdoors, but he refused with a shake and gestured me to a side entrance labeled for patrons. The handle was missing, replaced by a blank steel panel. He unlocked it using a key from his pocket and assured me it'd be quick. The space beyond felt off-kilter from the instant I crossed the threshold. Not threatening exactly, but confining. The panes were sealed from within by irregular boards, a few slanted at angles as if meant to bar entry or escape. The sparse setup included a worn-out sofa and a dispenser filled with treats long past their date. As he closed the panel behind me, the snap of a bolt echoed, despite the absence of any mechanism reachable from inside. A subtle wave of unease first crept over me then, inching along my back like a chill. Time stretched out endlessly. 60 minutes turned into twice that. Yet the garage remained silent, devoid of any clanging tools, murmured conversations, or stirring activity. I rapped on the door and leaned in to listen, but only the soft buzz of the vending machine and a draft whistling past the panels reached me. After the 3rd hour, restlessness overtook me. I began probing the walls and spotted a cramped storage panel hidden beside the machine. Its lower edge was bent, as though kicked in frustration long ago. I threw my full force against it until the timber creaked and gave way, revealing a tight passageway illuminated by one flickering light bulb hanging from a tattered wire. It ended at an entrance to the garage's rear. There sat my vehicle, right in its original spot, pristine and undisturbed. Nearby, orderly rows of plastic containers held an odd assortment of belongings that seemed mismatched. School bags, outerwear, hygiene kits for journeys, and even an infant's sneaker. They were organized as if someone were amassing remnants from lives that had simply vanished. Inspecting them closer revealed the true creepiness. One overflowed with tangled cables and devices bearing shattered displays. Another brimmed with stray baggage labels and trinkets. A third contained an assortment of shades, partially depleted travel-sized shampoo containers, and one twisted license plate, crumpled as if angrily bent. Nothing was tagged or categorized by source, just heaps of personal echoes, devoid of their stories. I spotted a familiar thermos brand, the kind ubiquitous at roadside diners, and for a fleeting instant, imagined strangers clutching them at fuel stops on voyages they never completed. The atmosphere carried the scent of stale lubricant mixed with a subtle, iron-like tang, reminiscent of blood scrubbed away ages back, yet lingering faintly. Seeing my own ride so intact only amplified the dread. Clearly, this man had no interest in fixing anything. I retreated cautiously, muffling my steps on the hard floor. The overhead bulb oscillated gently despite the stagnant air, casting erratic shadows over the containers that seemed to pulse with life. From deeper in the garage, out of view, came a brief rasp of something metallic skidding across the ground before halting. On impulse, I fumbled for my keys and discovered they were gone from my pocket. They were in the repairman's possession. My bag was missing too. I'd stashed it inside the vehicle. That realization struck deep, illuminating the vulnerability. Out in this isolation, stripping someone's essence could happen so effortlessly, their ride, their possessions, their communicator, and they'd fade into a forgotten report on a disappearance ledger, if ever noted. The hallway veered left, steering clear of the main space toward a side exit featuring a narrow pane of reinforced glass. I edged in that direction, tallying my strides to steady my racing thoughts. The glass was coated in paint from within, though cracks at the borders let slivers of sunlight seep in. I cupped my ear to the steel panel and caught the remote hum of vehicles hurtling along the expressway. That noise crystallized my resolve. Escaping through there meant abandoning the car without regret. I'd seek aid or simply put space between us. The handle stuck initially, but shouldering it hard made the rusted frame shudder, and the lock yielded sufficiently for me to squeeze out into the glaring end-of-day sun. Weeds thrust through fractured pavement behind the structure, and the rear yard extended to a ragged lawn bordering the roadside incline. No other vehicles lingered there, no haulers, no traces of activity. The primary thoroughfare curved around the building's face, but from my vantage, it seemed an eternity distant. My heart pounded fiercely as I pushed through the overgrowth, crouching to avoid detection if the worker emerged. At first, I didn't sprint. I hurried along at a brisk pace, careful not to snag on a partially interred exhaust pipe or the frame of a discarded wheel. Arriving at the slope's rim and gazing at the bustling freeway beneath, the whoosh of speeding traffic affirmed that normalcy persisted beyond this forsaken corner. Only then did I dash forward, scrambling down the loose earth and staggering to the curb, thrusting my arm high in a frantic bid to hitch a ride. A cargo truck was the initial one to decelerate and acknowledge me. Its operator, a fellow in his 40s sporting a netted hat and a reddened collar from the sun, lowered the glass and gazed, puzzled, as if debating whether I was intoxicated or injured. I probably appeared unhinged, Dirt clung to my outfit, perspiration tracing paths across my cheeks, and I was gasping for air as if I'd dashed a full kilometer. I explained to him that I had to reach the nearest proper settlement, someplace with law enforcement. He skipped the interrogation, simply nodded toward the seat beside him, and mentioned he was traveling eastward. As the vehicle moved off, I peered back at the slope, almost anticipating the sight of the repairman standing there, observing. But everything stayed still. The spot seemed deserted once more, resembling a movie scene abandoned after the cameras stopped rolling. At the station, the desk officer paid close attention, though his eyes held a skeptical glint, as if he were weighing whether I was inflating the tale or if real wrongdoing was afoot. The moment I brought up the containers full of strangers' possessions, he shifted closer in his chair. That was the initial hint he was starting to credit my account. He requested the precise spot, but when I attempted to pinpoint it via my device, the signal flickered erratically and refused to stabilize. In the end, he called for backup to investigate the site as he jotted down my report, cautioning that deserted villages often served as dumps for goods or scrap operations. His tone implied even he doubted that rationale. Come evening, a colleague entered the space and murmured to my interviewer that the workshop was secured, dark inside, and appeared hastily cleared out. No trace of the worker, no sealed barriers, no storage units. None of the elements I'd outlined. Yet they spotted recent wheel impressions in the soil at the rear, pointing toward the highway. I inquired about my ride, and the two exchanged a look that signaled trouble. One coughed awkwardly and revealed a car fitting my details had turned up in a holding yard 2 districts over. Undamaged, no citation, no message, 0 clues on its arrival or the person responsible. The lot keeper insisted it arrived under cover of darkness, paperwork free. The following dawn, after they let me go, I headed directly to retrieve it. Spotting the vehicle aligned precisely amid a pair of others sent chills racing over me, in a sensation I can't quite describe even now. The interior was untouched. The bag I'd forgotten was still there. The ignition keys rested on the dashboard, aligned with deliberate precision, as though meant to draw attention. I questioned the keeper about surveillance from the previous evening, but he denied it. The setup had malfunctioned for several days from an electrical fault. I departed convinced I'd evaded a scenario designed to unfold far worse. I remain in the dark about the repairman's intentions or the purpose behind gathering those belongings. What I do know is that I now treat any vibration in my wheels with utmost caution, and I steer clear of halting in places absent from official charts.